So you've probably heard this term floating around a lot lately. India's economy is in a Goldilocks moment. You know, not too hot, not too cold, but just right. It sounds perfect, almost like a fairy tale, but for a country of 1.4 billion people, can a single story, a single fairy tale, really capture the whole truth? We're going to dig into what this Goldilocks moment is all about and see if the reality on the ground actually matches up with the headlines.
Okay, so first things first, what in the world is a Goldilocks economy? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like, pulled straight from that children's story. It's that economic sweet spot, that absolute dream scenario where the economy is growing strong, but not so fast that it kicks off crazy, out-of-control inflation. You can think of it as the perfect cruising speed. It's pretty much the holy grail for any government or central bank.
And look, this isn't just some catchy phrase the media came up with. This language is coming straight from the top. A key official from India's central bank, the RBI, literally described the current situation, high growth paired with low inflation, as a rare Goldilocks period. A statement like that, well, that's what really got this whole conversation started. All right, so what's fueling all this optimism? Let's peel back the layers and look at the hard numbers that make up the case for this just right economy.
The first number you absolutely have to see is 8.2%. That's the real GDP growth rate. I mean, just let that sink in. That is a massive number that firmly establishes India as the fastest-growing major economy on the planet. A figure like that, it makes everyone sit up and pay attention.
Now here's the other side of that Goldilocks coin, and this is what makes the story so compelling. While the economy is growing like crazy, inflation is incredibly cool. The main inflation number, the Consumer Price Index, dropped to just 0.25%. That's a record low. So when you have red-hot growth on one side and ice-cold inflation on the other, you can see why people are reaching for that fairy tale analogy.
And this isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet, right? This growth is tangible. The manufacturing sector, the engine room of the economy, and a huge source of jobs, is humming along with a really healthy 4.8% growth. It shows that this economic expansion isn't just a theory. It's happening in factories and on production lines.
And the good news doesn't stop there. The positive signs are pretty much everywhere you look. More people are in the workforce, exports are up, and tax revenues are strong. And it's not just an internal view either. Big global players like the World Bank and the IMF are upgrading their forecasts for India. When you put all these pillars together, you get a really compelling picture of a strong, confident economy.
But is that the whole story? Because if you look just a little bit closer, if you dig just beneath those amazing headline numbers, a much more complicated and honestly a more difficult picture starts to emerge. It begs the question, is everyone really getting a taste of this just right porridge?
So the first major crack in this golden story is inflation itself. That headline number, the one that's super low, looks fantastic, but that's an average of everything. The moment you pull out just the cost of food, you see a completely different and much wilder reality. Food prices have been swinging dramatically, even peaking at over 10%.
And why is that a huge deal? Well, because for tens of millions of families, the price of food is their cost of living. It can be almost half of their entire household budget. So while the official inflation rate looks great on paper, a lot of people are feeling a very real, very painful squeeze every single day.
This leads us right to what's happening with people's paychecks. On the surface, things look good. The average salary went up by over 9%. But that's before you account for the rising cost of living. Once you factor in inflation, that real wage growth, which your money can actually buy you, was a much smaller 2.5%. Your paycheck might be bigger, but your actual purchasing power is struggling to keep up.
So what this all adds up to is what a lot of economists are now calling a K-shaped recovery. Just picture the letter K. That top arm shooting upwards, that represents large corporations and wealthy individuals who are doing incredibly well. But the bottom arm, pointing down, that represents lower-income households who are getting hit with stagnant wages and rising costs. The two parts of the economy are literally moving in opposite directions. So, how did we get to this point? How did this split happen? Well, a huge piece of the puzzle is a decade's worth of economic reforms. The government has been pushing hard on policies meant to make India an easier place to do business, and those policies have had some really complex and sometimes contradictory results.
The main idea behind all these reforms was pretty straightforward. Cut through India's infamous layers of bureaucracy and red tape. The goal was to simplify everything from starting a company to enforcing a contract, all to make the system cleaner, clearer, and more efficient for businesses.
So, what's the verdict?
Well, honestly, it's a real mixed bag. You can't deny the wins. It's definitely faster to start a business, and the GST created a single national tax system. But at the same time, huge challenges are still there. Small businesses can get buried in GST compliance, and finding funding is still a major hurdle, especially if you're not a tech startup in a big city. It's a classic story of 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Okay, so this leaves us with two very, very different stories about the Indian economy, doesn't it? On one hand, you've got this narrative of a macroeconomic miracle, and on the other, a story of deep structural challenges. So how do we put these two realities together to figure out what's really going on?
This really is the heart of the matter. We have to ask, are those incredible headline numbers, that 8.2% growth, that rock-bottom inflation, are they the real story? Or does the struggle on the ground, the reality of high food prices and wages that don't stretch far enough, tell a more accurate truth?
And here's the thing, and this is probably the most important takeaway. Both of these stories are true. They aren't in conflict. They just describe a really complex, multi-speed reality. From that 30,000-foot top-down view, it looks like a Goldilock success. But from the bottom up, from the perspective of an average family's kitchen table, it feels like a story of real structural challenges and a feeling that the benefits aren't being shared by everyone.
So bridging that gap, that's the real challenge now. To get to an economy that feels just right for everybody, not just for the analysts. That incredible top-line growth has to be translated into real inclusive growth for families. That means things like fixing supply chains to control food prices, creating more jobs, and making sure the fruits of this economic boom actually reach all households. And this brings us to one last big question. Let's forget the charts and the percentages for just a second. What does a truly balanced economy actually feel like for the average person? Is it just about a big GDP number? Or is it about stability, about fairness, about opportunity? Because defining what just right really means for over 1 billion people, that's probably the most important economic conversation India can have right now.